Hi guys, it's GK. Jin Kyung-duk, a professor at Yunnan University in China, is recognized in economics and ethnocultural research. He is also a member of the Chinese State Council in recognition of his achievements. New Weekly magazine was founded in 1996. It has a reputation that all news starts from the New Weekly. Professor Jin's article was published in the New Weekly, and I would like to introduce it to you. Let's look into it. Who is still an enemy of Koreans in the 21st century? 99% of Koreans point to Japan. However, interestingly, if you ask the younger generation of Japan who live in the same era what Koreans come up with, they refer to relatively light words such as Korean food, Korean wave, and kimchi, not like some aggressive words such as the enemy of the nation or the world. Why do Koreans still look at the Japanese as the enemies of the world, even though it is the 21st century when Korea-Japan exchanges are frequent in various fields, including trade, culture, and art? Especially, if you look at the Korea-Japan sports matches, you can see many violent scenes that are similar to war. There are a lot of scenes we didn't even think about. For example, it is famous that the Korean team put the Korean flag on the Tokyo Dome mound in a baseball game. In particular, the scene where Koreans beat Japanese in the Olympics or international games and walk around the stadium with the Korean national flag on their bodies is a scene we have seen a lot. Many Korean players think that this is how they should play against Japan. On the other hand, Japanese do not understand why Koreans are so fierce. Why is the difference in perception between the two countries so big? The reason is that the two nations' view of history itself is really different. The Japanese are people who distort history, and Koreans are people who remember the history. For the Japanese, World War II is a history they don't want to look back on. But Koreans will never forget about the Japanese invasion before World War II. Koreans remember the bloody history of the Japanese invasion at the time. But why are the Japanese distorting this history? A group of publishing Japanese history textbook led by Nobukatsu Fujioka and Kanji Nizio said that the middle school textbook that includes Japan's invasion of Asia and Korea are denying Japan things, and also claimed that Nanjing massacre and comfort women issues should be deleted in history textbook. In particular, a book titled The Public's Negligence Compiled to Restore the Pride of the Japanese People within this new textbook publishing group shows the following historical perception. Number 1. Nanjing massacre did not exist, and Japanese military sexual slavery was called comfort women also didn't exist too. Number 2. Comfort women were not Japanese military sexual slavery, they were just the prostitutes. Number 3. China's claim that 300,000 people were killed during the massacre, and the number between 100,000 and 200,000 written in the Japanese history textbooks are not all true, and the actual figure is up to 10,000. In particular, according to a report by Nanjing Safety Zone, the number of casualties in the general population is only 47. Number 4. Japan is not responsible for the colonization of Joseon and the Sino-Japanese War. Joseon and China, which were left behind in modernization without feeling a sense of crisis under the threat of Russia and the US at the same time, are rather responsible. Number 5. Nanjing massacre and comfort women issue are fabrication of history of anti-Japanese. Especially if you look at the page 134 of Nobukatsu Fujioka's book, The Truth of History, you will find the shocking opinions. Joseon should reflect on itself before criticizing Japan. At the time, Joseon had to have the level of the modern state to manage itself. Japan was kind to Joseon to raise the level of its colony to the level of Japan. The reason why the Japanese that much denying history is simple. Because they want to cover up their brutal militaristic history. However, the Japanese mindset about history doesn't work for Koreans. I have analyzed the attachment and resentment of Korea earlier, but I couldn't really tell the difference between those emotions. Koreans use the word Jang as an internal driving force to unite each other, and the word Han as a driving force to unite externally. Because these two emotions are essential emotions, and they are actual driving forces of the Korean. The reason why I said the Korean are people who remember history is because the Korean government banned the import of Japanese culture for 53 years after the end of the World War II. For 53 years, Koreans have remembered all kinds of bad deeds and disgrace that a country called Japan did when it came to Korea. Do you know how Korea dealt with it when Japan went ahead with the Shaolin worship instead of apologize for comfort women issues and Nanjing massacre? I would like to take Kang Deok-kyung for instance, a victim of comfort women who passed away in February 1997. This lady left a famous painting during her lifetime. It is a picture of a young Joseon girl who was stabbed and bleeding under the Japanese flag. She was the one who took the lead than anyone in an apology and compensation for the comfort women. Before her death, she said the following in front of the Japanese reporter. If you still don't understand what kind of injuries Japan inflicted on comfort women during World War II, I will go back to Japan to explain, so please give me a passport. There are 4 implications in the phrase, I will go back to Japan to explain. Who will she talk to? It's Japanese public. What is she going to explaining? It's the history of Korea comfort women suffering. Why would she like to speak? Because the Japanese still do not know. Why does she want to go back there again? Because even if Japanese heard it, they could not accept it. It became the last word of her death. Ironically, August 15 marked as the anniversary of the end of the war for Japan. On this day, many memorial ceremonies are held in Japan for the dead across the country. August 15th is the Liberation Day in Korea. Just by looking at this, the difference between the two countries' perspective is pretty clear. On August 15th, Koreans speak up to Japanese. On this day, you guys hold a memorial ceremony for those who invade our country, but we know that this is an important day got out of your colonial rule. The renowned Taiwanese writer Zhu Bunryong said the following about Koreans' view of history. Koreans have spirits and strong personality. Japan has been making noise for more than 30 years, manipulating the history of aggression and provoking with dokdo, but Korean will not let it go. I have walked the street of Korea. With a little attention, you will find that there are many historical statues throughout the streets, such as national hero Lee Sun-shin and anti-Japanese hero An Jung-geun. And under the statue, the achievements and the past of these heroes are recorded. And even in the school, you can see small monuments and statues of them. Imagine it. If a 2-3 years old child who lives in this environment in the world point out the statue to his father and ask who it is, and how detailed will the Korean parents who know such heroes as they know their heroes like the back of the hand? Koreans' view of history will pass on to the next generation. Memories and history will coexist and be delivered in this way. Koreans learn about their history by encountering their heroes everywhere, rather than learning through theories or academic papers. So it is perfectly normal for Koreans to have such historic knowledge in their hearts. Korea and China had conflict over the Goguryeo issue before. When the Chinese History Academia said that the history of the Goguryeo and Balhae belongs to the history of ethnic minorities in northeast China, fierce protests began in the Korean academia. At the time, a Korean expert pointed out that many Chinese people weren't aware of this, and from the perspective of Korean, this distorted view of China is like digging the graves of the ancestors, and that it is a serious violation of Korea's legitimacy and identity. Given to these cases, I think a foundation of Korean culture is history. The historical confrontation between Japan and Korea will continue to occur in the future. This is something we have to pay attention to further. There is a phrase that there is no future for people who have forgotten their history. Japan will have to deeply apologize for the filthy and barbaric behaviors they have committed. Thank you for watching. Have a happy day.